This seat is reserved. You don't belong here. Know your place. The words of Amanda Blake, a 35-year-old head flight attendant, cut through the luxury of the first-class cabin like a cold blade. All eyes turned instantly toward a black woman in a tailored navy blue suit, seated calmly in the front row. That woman was Danielle Carter, though no one on board knew the earth-shattering secret of her true identity. Danielle did not argue. She did not raise her brow or lash out. She simply tilted her head slightly, her eyes bright yet still, like the surface of a lake before a storm. Her heartbeat remained steady, but inside, decades of doubt and condescension rose once again. Again, she thought. The same looks, the same tone, the same suspicion. The cabin fell silent. No one spoke. Some passengers nervously looked down at their magazines. Others pretended to scroll through their phones. The air grew heavy, like a spark could turn it into a blaze. Amanda moved closer, her long finger pointing directly at Danielle's face. Her voice hardened, rising with each word. No matter what your ticket says, this is first class, and clearly you don't belong. Security, remove her immediately. A shock, a humiliation laid bare before dozens of strangers. 2 security officers appeared at the cabin door, striding forward like predators summoned to strike. A few passengers drew in sharp breaths, bracing for the all-too familiar scene they had read about in headlines. A black passenger dragged out of a seat for not being the right fit. But then, Danielle calmly reached into her handbag. The gesture was small, almost unnoticeable, yet it shifted the entire atmosphere. Her eyes did not waver. Her voice did not rise. Instead, she spoke 10 words. 10 words, crisp and precise, slicing through the veil of pretense. Amanda froze. Her face drained of color. The guards stopped in their tracks, uncertain. A few passengers widened their eyes, suddenly realizing this was no ordinary dispute over seating. In that instant, everyone knew. The flight attendant had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Only Danielle knew, however, that this mistake would not simply end one person's job. It would unravel an entire world built on false certainty. Amanda remained blind to it all. In her mind, Danielle was just another passenger out of place, someone who had wandered into luxury where she did not, or belong. Her arrogance pushed her to press further, her voice sharp and scornful. "This is not your place. You think dressing nicely gives you the right to sneak into this world?" Danielle remained silent, but it was not the silence of the powerless. It was the silence of a storm gathering strength, of someone who knew she held every card. The passengers nearby began to notice. Their eyes shifted from disdain to suspicion. No one humiliated like that could stay this composed. No one, unless they possessed a power too great to display. One whispered, "Who is she?" Another replied, "I don't know, but she's not just anyone." Amanda did not hear, or perhaps refused to. To her, this was just another display of dominance, something she had performed countless times without resistance. But this time, the target was not a defenseless customer. Behind Danielle's composed gaze was the truth. Danielle Carter, 42, a self-made billionaire, CEO of Carter Aviation Holdings, and the very owner of the aircraft Amanda thought she controlled. And with a single call, with 10 simple words, she had already set in motion the collapse of Amanda's entire career. Before the passengers, two contrasting images crystallized: a flushed flight attendant, trembling yet shouting with blind confidence, and a silent woman, serene and still, whose authority flowed like an underground current waiting to erupt. In that cabin, time itself seemed to stop. Everyone sensed they were about to witness a revelation that would defy belief. Danielle closed her eyes briefly, drew in a slow breath, and thought, "If they believe I don't belong here, then I will show them who truly has the power to decide who belongs where." Whispers rippled through the first-class cabin. Passengers no longer cared about their glasses of wine or the pages of their financial newspapers. Every eye fixed on one single point: the black woman sitting tall in the middle of the storm. Danielle Carter did not utter another word. But one small detail made the sharpest observers shiver. Her hand rested lightly on her handbag, her phone screen still glowing. The call had ended, but its consequences were already spreading like invisible ripples. Amanda Blake had yet to realize. In her mind, this was just another difficult passenger she could remove to please others. Her eyes shifted toward the man who had just stepped in, heavy-set in a shiny grey suit, his Swiss watch glittering under the lights. Richard Langford, 52, Skyline's most prized VIP, the man accustomed to occupying the very seat Danielle now held. Richard raised a brow, his lips curling into a disdainful smile. "This is absurd. I paid to avoid this kind of spectacle, and now I'm forced to share space with a misfit?" He did not need to name her. Everyone knew. Amanda straightened instantly, her voice dripping with saccharine deference. "My apologies, Mr. Langford. I've tried to resolve this situation, but some people don't understand the meaning of rules." Richard sneered, settling into the seat beside her, his gaze sweeping over Danielle as if she were a stain on marble. She should be moved to economy. That's where she belongs. A low laugh rattled from Amanda's throat, both sycophantic and cruel. "You're right, sir. Some seats simply aren't for everyone." The air turned suffocating. An elderly couple lowered their eyes, shaking their heads. A teenage girl stared wide-eyed, her hands clenched tight around her seatbelt. At the back of the cabin, a young black businesswoman, Angela Moore, quietly raised her phone, recording every second. Danielle remained silent, but her silence was like a mirror, reflecting the naked truth of the cabin. Discrimination unmasked. Two security officers approached. James Howard, 40, wore a stern face, but his eyes revealed hesitation. Beside him, Carlos Rodriguez, 38, strode forward brashly, one hand already hovering at his belt, as if ready to drag her away. James spoke gently. "Ma'am, we've been asked to escort you." Danielle raised her head, her gaze deep and steady as it met his. "Tell me, what exactly am I accused of?" James faltered. He saw an unsettling calm, the glaring absurdity of the charge. But Amanda cut in fast, desperate to mother any flicker of truth. "She's been disruptive since boarding, defying the crew, disturbing the passengers." Carlos nodded, stepping forward. "If you don't come willingly, we'll have to remove you." A wave of fury rose in Danielle's chest, but she swallowed it down, hardening it into steel. Her lips moved, just enough for James to hear. "Remember this moment, and what you're witnessing." James's eyes flickered. He didn't know why his pulse quickened, why his hand suddenly froze, unwilling to touch this woman. Amanda, on the other hand, was triumphant. For years, she had wielded her small but absolute power in the cabin. One word from her could brand a paying customer a problem. Today, she believed she had won again. "This is your final chance," Amanda announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Either you leave this seat, or you will be arrested for disrupting the flight." The moment froze. An invisible line was drawn. Either Danielle would be dragged away in shame, or Danielle exhaled softly. Memories crashed through her mind, the doubt in boardrooms, the stares in luxury hotels, the biting questions about how someone like her could possibly belong. And now, on the very aircraft she owned, she was hearing the same refrain once again. "Enough." She nodded slightly, her eyes flashing with the resolve of someone who had risen from the depths and conquered them. "Is that your final decision?" Danielle asked, her voice low yet resonant, carrying through the cabin. Amanda smiled, smug and certain. "Yes. This is the final decision. Security. Remove her." But Amanda did not know that her so-called final decision was also the death sentence for her career. Danielle calmly lifted her phone to her ear, and this time, no one dared ignore it. Every passenger heard each word, each syllable fall like a gavel's strike. "This is Danielle Carter. I'm aboard Flight 247. Cancel all contracts with Langford Industries. Effective immediately. Convene an emergency board meeting." Silence. A silence so heavy it pressed on every chest. Richard Langford's eyes bulged, his face flushing red as if slapped. Amanda's jaw dropped, her skin drained of color. Carlos froze, his hand retreating. James let out a long breath, realizing he had just witnessed history pivot. In that cabin, every passenger felt a chill race down their spine. The woman they had just watched being humiliated was the true owner of it all. The cabin fell silent as if someone had flipped a switch. The engines still roared steadily outside, but inside everyone could hear only the pounding of their own hearts. The name Danielle Carter had just been spoken by the very woman Amanda Blake and Richard Langford had humiliated. A name that was no stranger to anyone in aviation. A name tied to billion-dollar deals, sweeping reforms, and countless headlines hailing the black woman who changed the skies. But Amanda did not grasp it at once. Her mind froze, hearing Danielle's lips form the words, the sound crashing into her ears before melting into a wave of panic. No, it can't be," she whispered, her skin drained of color, the hand she had pointed now trembling. Richard Langford reacted more violently. He shot up from his seat, his voice cracking. "This is some kind of joke. She can't be Carter. I saw her at the Zurich summit. She dressed differently, looked different. This is just..." But no one believed him. Several passengers had already recognized the face, one that had appeared on the covers of Forbes, CNN, Bloomberg. A few even whispered, "My God, it really is her." Danielle sat tall, eyes closed as though holding back a storm of emotion. Memories surged through her. She remembered her childhood in the slums of Atlanta, a leaking roof whenever it rained, gunshots in the alley, the pitying looks from those convinced a little black girl could never escape her fate. She remembered the job interviews where her brilliant resume was dismissed with the phrase, "We need someone with a more professional image." And professional, in their eyes, meant someone who did not look like her. She remembered her first contracts, the dilapidated planes she bought, the first employees she hired, each a battle against impossible odds. The world had tried to push her out, insisting she did not belong. But Danielle had proved the opposite, and today the circle had closed. Here, in the very skies she commanded, someone dared to repeat that tired refrain. But this time, she had the power to end it instantly. Near the entrance to the cabin, Captain Sarah Lee froze when she recognized her. Her heart raced. 5 years earlier, it had been Danielle Carter who signed the paper that gave her a chance after every other airline rejected her for being an Asian woman. Sarah remembered the warmth in Danielle's eyes that day, and the words, "We don't need an image, we need talent." Sarah knew at once, if Carter had made a call herself, then a storm was about to break, and anyone who had just insulted her would see their career swept away like a leaf on water. Amanda still clung to her last shred of arrogance. She forced a shaky smile, her voice quivering yet harsh. You're just a passenger. You're not in charge here." Danielle opened her eyes, looking straight at her. That gaze alone was enough to make Amanda choke, her heartbeat stumbling. "I am the one who signed your contract, Amanda Blake," Danielle said, her voice gentle yet striking like a gavel. "And in a few minutes, you will no longer be a flight attendant for this airline." The cabin erupted in shock. Some passengers gasped, others exhaled as if justice had just arrived. Angela Moore, the young businesswoman, gripped her phone tightly, recording every second. She knew this footage would become historic evidence. Richard Langford collapsed back into his seat, his face flushed crimson as though stripped bare before 100 cameras. He stammered, his voice breaking. We can work this out, Ms. Carter. I'm your biggest partner." Danielle tilted her head slightly, a faint, bitter smile curving her lips. "You were my biggest partner. Now you are not." The short reply cut like a blade, severing the last thread that tied Richard to his lofty status. Sweat beaded on his brow as he realized millions of dollars had slipped through his fingers in an instant. At the back, Carlos Rodriguez, the hot-tempered guard, withdrew his hand, hardly daring to breathe. James Howard whispered to himself, "Thank God, at least I didn't touch her." An uncanny silence enveloped the cabin. It was no longer the silence of indifference, but of reverence, of awe at the quiet power that had just erupted. Danielle rose, walking with calm grace. Her navy suit glimmered under the golden lights, each step a declaration. She did not need to shout, she did not need to rage, yet she could make the entire world bow. And in everyone's mind, a single thought rang out. They were wrong. They had picked the wrong woman. The first-class cabin now felt like a stage where every role had been reversed. The one who once held control, Amanda Blake, now trembled like an actress who had forgotten her lines. The one humiliated, Danielle Carter, had become the center, radiating a power that made every gaze bow. But before the truth was fully revealed, there were still others silently watching. Sarah Lee, the 41-year-old captain, stood at the cabin door, forcing her face into professional calm, while inside her chest a storm raged. She had flown for 20 years, enduring doubtful stares as an Asian woman in a male-dominated world. And now, she was witnessing with her own eyes the very person who had given her a chance, Danielle Carter, being insulted by her own crew aboard the company's plane. Sarah's grip tightened on the clipboard in her hands. She knew this moment would be etched into the airline's history. In the cockpit, First Officer David Miller, only 20 to 9, sat frozen, listening through the intercom. His heart pounded. His mother was ill, medical bills piled high, and he needed this job more than anything. He knew Amanda was wrong. He knew Richard was arrogant, but fear of unemployment chained him to silence. "If I speak up, will I still get a paycheck next week?" he asked himself, before bowing his head in shame. Elsewhere, Angela Moore, the young black businesswoman, kept filming quietly. Her fingers shook, but her eyes remained steady. She knew this video could protect the truth. She had faced belittling looks in boardrooms for years, but today she was not filming for herself. She was filming for everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. Amanda still refused to yield. She scraped together the last shreds of her power, her voice sharp but cracking. "You think one phone call changes anything? This is an airplane, and here I am the one in charge." The words had barely left her lips when James Howard, the calm security officer, cleared his throat softly. He dared not oppose Amanda outright, but doubt was clear in his eyes. With over 10 years in aviation security, he had never seen a passenger remain so calm under threat. "Are you sure about this, Amanda?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of warning. Amanda spun around, furious. "I am the chief attendant here. I am sure." Danielle rose slowly. Every movement sliced through the suffocating air like a blade. Her dark navy suit caught the light, making her appear like a statue of steel. She did not shout. She did not rage, but her words, spoken softly, made the cabin tremble. "You have just confirmed your final decision, and you have just signed your own sentence." Richard Langford leapt up, his face flushed, scrambling to salvage the moment. "Miss Carter, please listen to me. This was just a misunderstanding. Amanda may have been rash, but she didn't mean it. I am the largest client of Carter Aviation. I bring in millions every year. We can work something out." Danielle turned, fixing him with a gaze as cold as a sky before the storm. "Mr. Langford, in a few minutes you will no longer be my client. I have just cancelled every contract with your company. This is not a misunderstanding. This is the truth, a truth I cannot and will never compromise." Her words fell into the cabin like a hammer. Richard staggered, his mouth gaping. The shadow of power he had always worn dissolved like smoke. Amanda collapsed into a nearby seat, her mind spinning. She thought of 12 years of service, the pride of wearing her navy blue uniform, the compliments from passengers calling her professional. All of it vanished in mere minutes. Captain Sarah Lee watched the scene, torn between pain and relief. Pain that the company Danielle had built to fight injustice had harbored the very injustice it opposed. relief that justice had finally spoken. Danielle took another step forward, her gaze sweeping across the cabin, her voice ringing like iron bells. No one here is above anyone else. First class is not for skin color. It is for those who have earned it, and I have paid with my entire life to earn it. Passengers fell silent, many bowing their heads in shame. They knew they had chosen silence when they should have spoken. In that moment, the first-class cabin was no longer a flight. It had become a mirror, reflecting prejudice, cowardice, and the unshakable strength of a woman once underestimated, but holding true power. Danielle paused, her eyes settling on Amanda one final time. Her voice dropped low, soft as breath, yet sharper than any blade. You thought I did not belong here, but it is you who no longer has a place. The first-class cabin sank into a suffocating silence. Every passenger seemed pinned to their seat, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Only the steady hum of the engines outside remained, stretching on like a soundtrack for the storm that was forming. Amanda Blake swallowed hard, but her throat was dry as sand. For years she had grown used to the authority that came with her uniform. A small authority, but one powerful enough to make passengers obey. Today, that authority had shattered like glass crashing to the floor. She thought of 12 years gone by, the long flights, the exhausting night shifts, the times she was praised as the model flight attendant. All of it vanished in minutes. Worse still, she could feel the contempt in the eyes of the very passengers who once silently sided with her. In the seat beside her, Richard Langford fumbled with a handkerchief to wipe his sweat, but his hands felt heavy as sun. The man who once fancied himself the king of the skies, accustomed to bows and pre-poured wine, now faced a brutal truth. Contracts worth tens of millions had just been cancelled with a single phone call. No, this can't be, Richard muttered, but deep in his eyes he knew there was no way back. Meanwhile, Security Officer James Howard looked on, filled with relief and shame. If I had followed Amanda's order from the start, I would have laid hands on the very owner of this airline, he thought. Thank God I hesitated. His colleague, Carlos Rodriguez, flushed red, sweat pouring down his temples. He replayed his own arrogant words from only minutes ago. We will escort you if necessary. Now those words echoed back like a death knell for his career. At the back of the cabin, Angela Moore clutched her phone tightly. Her screen captured everything. Amanda's discriminatory remarks, Richard's arrogance, the shameful silence of the passengers. Angela knew this video was not just evidence. It would become a fire, spreading fast, burning away the mask of an airline that had long hidden its injustices. Danielle Carter stood tall in the center of the cabin. Her navy blue suit hugged her frame, the overhead lights reflecting off the fabric until she looked like a living monument. Her gaze swept across each face, lingering long enough for everyone to feel the weight of the truth. You want to know who I am, she said, her voice low and resonant, every word falling like a gavel strike. I am the one who signs the paychecks of every employee here. I am the one who signed the purchase of this very plane. I am the one you thought did not belong here. No one breathed. A girl of about 16, sitting beside her mother, whispered, Mom, that's her, CEO Carter. The mother squeezed her daughter's hand tightly, nodding, her eyes shining with tears of shame for her own silence. Amanda's body went limp, her lips trembling. I didn't know. I had no idea. Danielle turned to her, eyes like blades. Ignorance is never an excuse. The way you treated me today is the same way you've treated countless others. Passengers without a voice, without power to resist. But the truth is, I have seen it all. Richard tried to cut in, his voice desperate. Miss Carter, I can explain. Amanda is just an employee, but I am a strategic partner. We can renegotiate. Don't let a moment of anger. Danielle cut him off, her voice firm and unyielding. Mr. Langford, you disrespected me openly, in front of staff and passengers. You disrespected everything I represent. A contract, no matter how many millions it is worth, cannot buy back the dignity you trampled on. That contract is dead, and your reputation will die with it. The cabin shook with the force of her words. A few passengers clapped softly, as if justice had just been served. Others bowed their heads, ashamed of their own silence. Captain Sarah Lee stepped forward, her eyes glistening. She bowed her head to Danielle, not out of hierarchy, but out of respect. Ms. Carter, I am so sorry for allowing this to happen on our flight. Danielle laid a hand on Sarah's shoulder, her tone softening. Sarah, this is not your fault. But remember this. The silence of good people can be as dangerous as the actions of the bad. Our duty is to change that. Her words echoed across the cabin, striking every heart. Avoidant eyes began to meet each other. Some passengers nodded quietly, as if they had just received a lesson they would never forget. Amanda collapsed into her seat, tears streaming down her face. But no one reached out to lift her up. Richard slumped, face flushed, his phone buzzing relentlessly with urgent warnings from his company. And Danielle, she stood tall, a living testament that truth, once revealed, carries more power than any false authority. She drew a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the crew. This journey toward justice is not over. It has only just begun. The first-class cabin felt frozen in place. Every gaze was fixed on the woman who had just stood to reclaim her dignity, Danielle Carter. Yet she was not reclaiming it for herself alone. She was handing down a verdict on all who believed prejudice was a form of power. Amanda Blake swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. The flight attendant's uniform she had once worn with pride now felt as heavy as chains. Images of past flights, of the times she had snapped at passengers of color, came rushing back like ghosts. She wanted to defend herself, to cry out, "I was only following habit," but her lips trembled, unable to form the words. Danielle turned to the two security officers. James Howard stood rigid, his eyes lowered, a silent acknowledgement of guilt. Carlos Rodriguez was stiff, fists clenched, beads of sweat running down his temple. He recalled his own harsh voice only minutes earlier, the crude threat. "We will escort you if necessary." Now he felt like a man standing before a judge. Danielle did not need to shout. Her voice was calm, yet each word struck straight into the heart. "James Howard, I recognize your hesitation. That very hesitation saved you from the greatest mistake of your life. Remember this. Security is not a tool to enforce prejudice. It is a shield meant to protect justice." James nodded firmly, his throat tight. He did not expect forgiveness, but her words felt like a rope pulling him back from the edge. Danielle's gaze shifted to Carlos. Her tone hardened like steel. "And you, Rodriguez, you were ready to turn lies into shackles. A security officer who acts without evidence, without truth, is the greatest danger to every passenger. You have failed in your duty." Carlos dropped his head, unable to protest. He knew his career had just crumbled to ash. Amanda broke down, stumbling forward before collapsing to her knees in the aisle. "Please, Miss Carter, I was wrong. I didn't know. Please give me one more chance. I've worked here for over 12 years. I have nothing but this job." Her sobs ripped through the tense air. A few passengers felt pity stir, but none dared to speak on her behalf. They knew Amanda's chance had been lost long ago, not because of one mistake, but because of a toxic pattern she had repeated for years. Danielle bent down slightly, her eyes cold but shadowed with sorrow. "Amanda Blake, this is not your first mistake. You turned discrimination into habit, contempt into routine. Today, you revealed it all in front of me, the owner of this company. And from this moment forward, your career ends. You are terminated. Effective immediately." The words rang through the cabin like a gavel in court. Amanda collapsed completely, her eyes vacant, knowing her sentence had been sealed. Richard Langford, who had remained silent until now, tried to rise. His voice shook with desperation. "Ms. Carter, I admit. Perhaps I spoke out of turn. But we've been partners for years. We can renegotiate. I will apologize publicly. Just withdraw your decision to cancel the contract." Danielle turned, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "Mr. Langford, you did not merely misspeak. You revealed your nature. A man who disrespects human dignity will never be my partner. The contract is cancelled, the door is closed, and your career will carry the consequences." Richard sank back into his seat, his face flushed, hands clutching his head. The image of a powerful investor had crumbled into that of a broken man, isolated in first class. Meanwhile, Captain Sarah Lee stepped forward, facing Danielle. Her voice trembled, but resolve underpinned every word. "Miss Carter, I promise that what happened today will mark the beginning of reform. I will do everything to ensure our crews never allow this to happen again." Danielle placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, her voice softening like rain after a storm. "I believe in you, Sarah. I chose you for this role because I saw someone who could face hardship head-on. Turn your promise into action. Let this be the last flight where injustice has a seat." The cabin sank into a solemn silence. Passengers bowed their heads, some quietly shedding tears. No one looked at Danielle as a black woman who did not belong. Now they saw her as a mountain standing firm against the storm, a mountain forged from years of struggle, patience, and unrelenting fight. Danielle turned back, walking slowly to her seat. Her voice carried, deep and resonant, etching itself into every memory. Today, it was not just a flight attendant who lost her job, nor a contract that was cancelled. Today we witnessed the truth. Dignity is not a gift. It is a right. And anyone who dares to strip it away will pay the price. The cabin was silent as stone, but in the hearts of all present, a fire had been lit. The first-class cabin remained frozen in silence, It felt as though everyone had just witnessed a swift courtroom trial where justice was carried out instantly. Yet more important, everyone sensed it. This was only the beginning. Danielle Carter settled back into her seat, but her presence no longer resembled that of a passenger. She sat as though she were a supreme judge who had just struck the gavel. Every gaze clung to her, filled with both fear and reverence. Danielle drew a deep breath, letting the atmosphere settle, then spoke her words slow and deliberate, each one carving itself into the minds of those listening. What happened today is not just the fault of one individual. It is a mirror reflecting a disease deeply rooted in the entire airline industry, a disease called prejudice. A murmur rose from the rows behind. A few nodded, while others lowered their heads in shame. She continued, "First class is not simply about wider seats or fine wine. It is a symbol of the discrimination that for too long has been treated as natural, deciding who belongs and who does not. And today, we all saw that truth laid bare before our eyes." Captain Sarah Lee stood tall, her face taut with emotion. Pride swelled within her, mixed with sorrow. The very company Danielle had built to fight injustice had harbored people like Amanda. "Miss Carter," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. "You can trust me. We will not let this flight fade into silence. I will use every power I have to change the way we serve." Danielle nodded gently. She knew Sarah meant every word, because her eyes could not lie. Meanwhile, James Howard remained by the cabin door, staring down at his shoes, his chest heavy with regret. Why did I stay silent for so long? Why did I only breathe easier once the truth revealed itself? He vowed silently that from this day on, if he ever faced injustice again, he would not remain a bystander. Carlos Rodriguez, who had once threatened Danielle, now sat slumped on a jump seat, his face pale. He knew his future in the industry was over, and the silence of the passengers around him was proof of what he feared most. Everyone had seen, and everyone would remember. Angela Moore's hands trembled as she held her phone, still recording. Her eyes, however, were steady. She knew the footage would shake the online world. More than that, she realized she had just witnessed history. Danielle swept her gaze across the cabin, then lowered her voice, warm yet filled with command. "I built Carter Aviation, not just to fly farther or faster. I built it so that every person who steps onto our planes is met with respect. Today I saw my work betrayed. That cannot continue." She paused, breathing deeply. The engines rumbled outside, echoing her words. "Starting tomorrow, there will be reform. Every employee, from flight attendants to security, to senior management, will undergo retraining, not only in skills, but in ethics and humanity. We will not just serve flights. We will serve human dignity." A middle-aged passenger who had been silent whispered aloud, "My God, she really will change the entire industry." Other eyes welled with tears. An elderly woman by the window dabbed her eyes and whispered softly, "Dignity at last, someone has spoken it." Richard Langford heard it all, his face flushed red, but his heart cold as ice. He knew his reputation would be destroyed not only by the cancelled contract, but by Angela's recording, His venomous words would spread across the world like an indelible sentence. Amanda Blake slumped in her seat, mascara streaked down her cheeks. As Danielle's words echoed, she saw only one truth. She had dug her own grave long before today. Danielle ended with a single line, deep and firm, that silenced the cabin completely. I have fought my whole life for my place here, and I promise never again will anyone, anywhere, be told you don't belong here on any flight of mine. In that moment, the first-class cabin seemed to glow. It was no longer a place to flaunt status, but a living classroom where everyone had just learned an unforgettable lesson. Dignity does not come with a ticket price, but once it is trampled, the cost is an entire career, an entire future. The plane cut through the white clouds, but inside the first-class cabin, no one felt as if they were on an ordinary flight. The air was thick, as though a verdict had just been delivered, and its aftershocks were beginning to spread. Danielle Carter sat upright, her gaze distant. She knew that from the moment she spoke, it was not only Amanda's or Richard's fate that had shifted. The entire airline, perhaps the entire aviation industry, was being pulled into the storm. Angela Moore kept her phone recording, her heart pounding. On the screen, Danielle stood tall, her voice carrying like thunder, living proof of a truth that could not be denied. Angela knew that once this video was shared, the whole world would see how a black CEO had been humiliated on her own plane, and how she had responded with calm authority and undeniable power. In the middle row, the Hendersons, their hair silver with age, looked at each other uneasily. They remembered those first moments when they stayed silent, lowering their heads, too afraid to intervene. Now that silence weighed heavy on them. The wife whispered, "We should have said something." Her husband squeezed her hand, shame clouding his eyes. "We chose safety, and today, that safety became our shame." Emma, the teenage girl, sat frozen. The scene seared itself into her memory, like a scar. She realized the lesson no textbook had ever taught her. Injustice was not just a thing of history. It lived in airplane seats, in glances, in words. And the silence of witnesses was sometimes sharper than the shouts of abusers. Captain Sarah Lee returned to the cockpit, her hands trembling as they touched the controls. Her heart swelled with both reverence and regret. Carter trusted me. She gave me the responsibility to keep this company just. I will not fail her. Never again. Beside her, young First Officer David Miller sat in turmoil. He thought of his mother, a black woman who had endured cold indifference in hospitals simply because of her modest appearance. Watching Danielle suffer humiliation today, he realized how much he resembled those who once turned their backs on his mother. A quiet resolve burned inside him. I will never stay silent again. Never. Richard Langford, the man who once commanded with arrogance, now sat hollow-eyed. His phone buzzed endlessly, emails from his board, messages from aides about his company's plummeting stock, after rumors spread that the CEO had cancelled the Langford Industries contract. He muttered in disbelief. It can't be. Everything I built, shattered over one seat. Amanda Blake slumped with her head down, mascara smeared, uniform wrinkled. In her mind, The echoes of her own shouts now stabbed back like knives. She heard Danielle's voice. "You are fired, effective immediately," and knew her life had just veered onto a road with no return. Danielle closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her harsh childhood, of every rejection because of her skin color, of the vow she made to herself. One day, she would create a space where no one would ever be told, "You don't belong here." Today, that vow had been fulfilled, but at the cost of the bitter truth that prejudice still lurked within her own ranks. She opened her eyes, her voice cutting through the cabin, steady and sharp as a blade. What happened today will not be buried. It will become a turning point. I will make sure every employee and every passenger understands that respect is not a choice. It is an obligation. A faint clap rose from a far corner. Then a middle-aged man stood, applauding louder. Another joined him. Soon, the entire cabin, those who had once stayed silent, rose together, applause thundering like a storm. Not out of flattery, but to acknowledge that they had just witnessed justice. Amanda wept into her hands. Richard bowed his head, trembling as his phone shook with warnings he dared not answer. James inhaled deeply, as though cleansed after years of silence. Angela kept recording, tears streaming down her cheeks. In the roar of applause, Danielle allowed herself a faint smile, not the smile of victory, but one of relief, as though the burden she had carried for years had finally been lifted. First class was no longer a place of privilege. It had become a courtroom of justice, where prejudice was stripped bare, and where true power lay not in a luxury ticket, but in the courage to speak the truth. And everyone knew, from this moment forward, the airline industry would never be the same again. The sound of applause still lingered when the crackle of the intercom filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to land at our next destination. Please fasten your seatbelts." Captain Sarah Lee's voice was steady and calm, but to everyone on board, it was more than a routine announcement. It felt like a reminder that an old era was ending and a new one was about to begin. The plane tilted gently, clouds sliding past the windows. The cabin was silent, each passenger lost in thought over what they had just witnessed. At the back, Amanda Blake sat frozen. Her hair was disheveled, mascara streaked down her cheeks. The uniform she once wore with pride now clung to her like a prison garment. Every second echoed Danielle's verdict in her mind. "You are fired, effective immediately." Her chest tightened, each breath like a gasp. She knew that when the plane touched down, the walk off that aircraft would be the longest, most shameful walk of her life. Up front, Richard Langford slumped in his seat. His phone buzzed relentlessly with emails from his board of directors, texts from legal advisors, and alerts of his company's stock plummeting. He did not dare open them. He knew the outside world had smelled blood. For the first time in his life, a man accustomed to power, accustomed to deference and privilege, felt small, exposed, and powerless. Angela Moore gripped her phone tightly. The half-hour video saved to her device was a ticking bomb. With a single tap, the world would see what had unfolded in first class. The humiliation, the arrogance, and the moment Danielle Carter reclaimed her dignity. Angela's eyes stung with tears, not from fear, but from conviction. She thought of her mother, who once was denied service at a hotel simply because of her name and her dark skin. "This video will be justice for my mother and for so many others," she whispered. The aircraft trembled as the wheels touched down. A sigh rippled through the cabin, but no one hurried to unbuckle. They knew the final act of this story was only beginning. The cabin doors swung open. A team of ground security stepped in, not to follow Amanda's orders, but to carry out Danielle Carter's. Danielle rose, her voice calm but resonant. "Escort flight attendant Amanda Blake off this plane. Her contract is terminated here and now." Amanda broke down in tears, her hands clasped together in desperate plea. But Danielle's eyes did not waver. 2 security officers bowed their heads in acknowledgement, then gently but firmly led her away. Amanda's steps dragged, her heels striking the floor like funeral bells tolling the end of a 12-year career. Every passenger watched, some shaking their heads, others turning away. Yet all understood. They were witnessing history. Then Danielle turned to Richard Langford. He leapt up, forcing a trembling smile. "Mrs. Carter, please hear me again. I can make this right. I'll donate. I'll launch an anti-discrimination campaign to make amends. Please." Danielle raised a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Langford, I have already spoken. The contract is cancelled. From today forward, your company's name will not appear on any Carter aviation plan. And one more thing, you are permanently banned from all of our flights." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Richard staggered back as though struck by a heavy blow. Danielle's tone sharpened, steel in her voice. "I will deliver a full report of your conduct to our entire partner network. You will not only lose your seat here, you will lose your standing anywhere that values human dignity." Richard collapsed into his seat, face ashen. In that moment, everyone saw a truth. Power, built on money alone, can vanish with a single sentence when it defies morality. Captain Sarah Lee stepped from the cockpit beside Danielle, her voice resolute. "Mrs. Carter, the entire crew is ready to follow your directives." Danielle nodded, then swept her gaze across the cabin. Her eyes moved over each face, the silent ones, the complicit ones, the brave ones who had dared to record. She drew a deep breath, her words echoing like a vow. "Today, we witnessed a stain, but from here, we will turn it into a lesson. I declare that Carter Aviation will undergo a full reform. No employee will ever again be allowed to hide prejudice behind a false smile. We will cleanse this to the root." This time the murmurs were not of shock, but of agreement. A few passengers nodded, others began to clap. Angela looked at the screen of her phone through tears. She felt a conviction rising. This video would ignite reform, not only in one airline, but across an entire industry. And Danielle stood beneath the cabin lights, tall and unshakable. She was no longer just the CEO of a corporation. She was the embodiment of a message. Dignity does not come with a ticket price. It is an inviolable right, and anyone who dares deny it will pay the cost. The plane came to a complete stop. The cabin doors opened. No one rushed to grab their luggage or jostled to leave as they usually would. They sat still, quietly, as if afraid to disturb a moment too important to break. Amanda Blake was escorted out first. Her once proud dark uniform was now wrinkled, her mascara smeared, her posture broken. Every step down the aisle felt as heavy as stone. The click of her heels no longer echoed authority, only the funeral march of a career that had ended. Passengers watched her go, without pity. They knew this was the consequence of 12 years, steeped in prejudice without remorse. Richard Langford stumbled out next. His phone buzzed incessantly, the screen flashing with dozens of missed calls. The news had already spread faster than he imagined. His company's stock was in freefall, and no PR team could contain the inferno once Angela's video went online. Richard was no longer the arrogant VIP, but a disgraced man who had lost both career and dignity in the skies. Meanwhile, Angela Moore remained in the cabin, her eyes fixed on her phone. The 30-minute recording was saved securely. Her hand trembled as she pressed the share button. In minutes, millions would see the truth. A tear slid down her cheek, but her smile was one of relief. "Mama, at last we are witnessing justice." Captain Sarah Lee turned to Danielle Carter, her gaze filled with reverence. Sarah knew what had happened today would transform the entire aviation industry, and she would be among the first to stand with Danielle in steering the course of reform. Danielle stood tall, her presence commanding beneath the dim lights. She swept her eyes across the cabin, her voice steady and resonant, yet imbued with a rare warmth. Today we did not just witness the downfall of a few individuals. We witnessed the collapse of the illusion that prejudice could endure forever. Carter Aviation will be rebuilt from the ground up. Every employee will be retrained. Every passenger will be treated with respect. This is not a promise, this is an order. The passengers sat in silence, but their hearts roared. Some were moved to tears. A young girl whispered to her mother, "I will never forget this moment." In that instant, the first-class cabin E, once seen as a symbol of privilege, transformed into a sanctuary, a place where justice had been declared. Weeks later, the aftershocks of that flight reverberated across the globe. Angela's video racked up tens of millions of views in just 3 days. It dominated headlines and set fire to discussions on every platform. Amanda Blake submitted job applications everywhere, but no airline would touch her name. She was branded forever with one word: discrimination. Richard Langford was forced to resign. His company lost contracts, lost credibility, and its stock collapsed. From billionaire, he became known only as the arrogant failure. In contrast, Carter Aviation was hailed as a pioneer against prejudice in aviation. Competing airlines were compelled to follow suit, rolling out sweeping training programs on respect and diversity. Sarah Lee was promoted to Director of Flight Operations, the first Asian woman in the airline's history to hold the role. James Howard was appointed to lead security training, his moment of hesitation now used as an example of the conscience instinct. And Angela Moore, the young woman who dared to record the truth, was invited to join the company as an intern in the Diversity and Inclusion Division. At a press conference, Danielle Carter stood before hundreds of cameras. She wore no extravagant attire, only a simple suit. Her eyes shone, her voice thundered. Justice is not something distant. It begins with how we treat each other every single day. Success is not measured by which seat we sit in on a plane, but by whether we respect the person seated beside us. I hope this story reminds everyone. Dignity does not come with a ticket price. It is a fundamental human right, and anyone who dares to deny it will pay the cost. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks, but in that light, Danielle's face was no longer merely that of a CEO. It was the face of a warrior who had turned humiliation into strength, prejudice into justice, and a single flight into a declaration for the entire world. In the world of aviation, there are contracts worth billions, but none more valuable than respect. That flight proved a single careless word, a single thoughtless act, can bring down an entire career. Danielle Carter did not simply defend her seat in first class. She turned it into a symbol for every passenger who had ever been doubted, belittled, or told, "You don't belong here." Management experts often say, "Crisis does not create leaders. It reveals who truly deserves to lead." And Carter proved exactly that. She did not use power to retaliate. She used justice to transform an entire system. This story reminds us, dignity cannot be bought, nor can it be sold. It is a basic right of every human being, regardless of skin color, gender, or status. If you believe that justice and respect must always be defended, press like to help spread this message, and subscribe so you never miss the next dramatic and inspiring story. And finally, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment with just 2 words, human dignity, to affirm that you too stand on the side of justice.